I've wasted a lot of time and money on music gear over the years, some of it on cheap gear and some on premium gear. But the truth is, sometimes cheap gear is actually a smart move, and other times it'll cost you more in the long run. So today I'm going to break down exactly when to buy cheap gear and when not to, so that you can learn from my mistakes and save yourself time and money. One of the biggest mistakes people make when buying new gear is upgrading in small increments. Tell me in the comments if this has ever happened to you, because the pain lessens when I see I'm not the only one. So let's say you buy a cheap Behringer interface to start out for less than $90. Then you get some spending money and decide you're going to upgrade your setup and get a Focusrite Solo for $150. Not bad so far, but then you decide you want another mic pre and some universal audio plugins and get the Volt 2. But here's the problem. Every time you upgrade your gear, you're probably going to sell your old gear for a bit less than you paid for it, even if you haven't had it long. So instead of upgrading in small increments, decide what you really want or need in your studio and save up until you can actually get something that'll make a noticeable difference. But a lot of people even mess this part up because the best gear isn't always what you need in your studio. For example, years ago, I was using a Behringer XR18 to do some live recordings, but I really felt the temptation to upgrade to an Apollo Twin because that's what I saw in a bunch of home studios and I knew it sounded really good. I remember recording vocals for the first time on the Apollo and I was blown away with how good it sounded. And I used it for a while before I ultimately decided that it was better for me to have a high channel count, even if the preamps don't sound as good and I don't have access to the UA plugins, which at the time were completely inaccessible unless you had an Apollo plugged in. But my point is, the Apollo definitely sounded better and outperformed the XR18 on a technical level, but the XR18 was undoubtedly the best choice for my workflow and budget at the time. But there are specific times when I would advise you to buy cheap gear. Firstly, if you're exploring a new skill set like learning piano, please do not go and buy a $2,000 keyboard. There are a couple of reasons for this. One, if for whatever reason you decide this isn't your thing, you just spent a bunch of money and you probably won't get it all back. Two, if you're learning a new skill, whether it be recording, playing an instrument, or whatever, I believe it's better to learn the fundamentals with something that really forces you to get creative and explore it. If you can make a $50 mic sound good, think of what you can do with a nicer mic someday. It's also great to buy cheap gear when the sound quality isn't noticeably impacted by the drop in price. For example, let's say you want to buy a MIDI keyboard, but you're on a really tight budget. Think of it this way. All your MIDI keyboard does is trigger virtual instruments in your DAW. So even a very cheap MIDI keyboard can get you started with great sounding results if you don't care much about feel and long-term durability. Another example of this is my Behringer ADA8200, which connects digitally to my Apollo, giving me an extra 8 ins and 8 outs, and it's much cheaper than some of the other ADAT preamps. I have an Apollo X4, so anything I want the absolute best quality out of can be plugged into the Unison preamps, and other things you won't hear much of a difference out of can be plugged into the Behringer, and it works well. Even the Focusrite Scarlett version of this thing is $400 more, so this is an example of when cheap gear was better, and if I really wanted better preamps, I probably wouldn't get the Scarlett Octo Pre. I'd probably have to spend like $800 to $1,000 to get something noticeably better, and that's just not where I'm at right now. But I'm not gonna lie, choosing the cheap gear can also be a huge waste of time. Working with a slow computer, a noisy interface, or a buggy MIDI controller will cause you to spend your time in the studio solving problems rather than making music. This is part of the trade-off, right? You spend less money so you can afford other gear or whatever the case may be, and sometimes that shows up in the form of your computer freezing up or your interface bugging out, and customer service isn't very helpful. And if you have noisy mic preamps on your interface, that little bit of noise becomes more prominent with each recording, so it's just something else that you have to deal with. I've spent literally hours troubleshooting connectivity and mapping issues with cheap gear, and that's just at the beginning of owning it. It's important to realize that there's a reason premium gear can be so expensive. You're paying for great sound, great feel, solid drivers, and quality customer service. So if you want to buy something that you can rely on for a long time, it's better to invest in quality gear. Alternatively, you end up getting into this cycle of buying cheap gear over and over when you could have just spent that money on a better quality product that'll last you longer. This is where we get into the saying, buy once, cry once. You can either buy cheap gear and cry multiple times as it breaks or causes you issues, or you can spend a big chunk of money one time and save the headache. For example, I have this Yamaha CP73 over here, which I saved up over the course of a year to buy, and I have zero regrets. Not to say I'll never have any issues at all with this keyboard, but Yamaha has a reputation of great sounds and great quality hardware, so I can have confidence that the big chunk of money that I throw at it will be worth it for me personally. I should also note here that I have played piano for most of my life, and I knew this was not some sort of experimental endeavor or phase of some sort. I didn't buy the CP73 for right now. I bought it for right now and a long time from now. And this could apply to any piece of gear you're thinking about buying. So if you have a Scarlett 2i2 like many of us started with, but you know that you want to upgrade to a slightly nicer interface, you might consider saving up until you can get a significantly better interface. I realize this has so far been a more abstract video than normal, so let me break it down into something a little more digestible. Cheap gear is great if you're just starting out, experimenting, or in situations where audio quality isn't a big deal. Premium gear is great and often well worth it when it sounds better, works better, and will last longer. You just have to be real with yourself. Am I buying this because it'll improve my process and potentially pay for itself? Or am I buying this because it looks cool and I have the money to? I should also say that it's not wrong to buy something because it's cool and you have some extra cash lying around. As long as you're aware of that and aren't taking away from some genuine bottlenecks in your workflow, I think it's great to keep this process enjoyable and inspiring, which is sometimes done by buying new gear. But if you want to see some specific examples of differently priced gear, check out this video where I compare a couple of $1,000 interfaces to a $700 interface with more features. And as always, thanks for hanging out.